CLG's lineup for their 2021 spring split season is actually looking kind of decent, not gonna lie. Now, a lot of people may be wondering, well, yeah, it looks like this roster really isn't going to shoot for the moon in that essence, but I feel like CLG fans will take anything that they can get at this point that isn't ninth or 10th place. So this is a big upgrade. So the starting lineup is going to be Finn in the top lane from the EULC, or the LEC rather, from Rogue previously, who was placed first in the regular season of Summer Split. So he's coming from there. You have Broxa coming from Team Liquid. Pobelter stays the same. And then you have Wild Turtle coming from FlyQuest, and Smoothie coming back again from CLG. And then also you have Coach Moon, or I guess now known as Galen, who was previously a jungler back in the days of LCS, and he's kind of been on the grind in Academy as a coach. So now 2020 was a really atrocious year for CLG. Like I said, they finished 10th in spring, 9th in summer. They had multiple different roster shuffles. They had to get rid of their coach, in Song, and then also they got rid of Weldon as well too. So they just had a really tumultuous year in that aspect. And then they had to, of course, swap out fucking Crown and whatnot and get Pobelter in there. And so it was just a whole big train wreck. And now you have, okay, I think the first piece to this puzzle, which is a big improvement, I think, is Finn over Ruin from last year. I mean, Finn had a pretty good year last year, and well, I guess this year technically, of 2020, where he won the regular season, and then he fell short as they went into playoffs, and then also they went into Worlds and went 1-5 in the group stage. So yes, there were some shortcomings in that regard, but I think just given the career of like this younger player, I think it's excusable, and now that is not to say that Finn is this phenomenal top player, that is come from one of the best LEC teams over there. It's more so that he's coming from a team that was pretty good. And that's really about it. The focus of Rogue was, with Larson or with Hansama or with Vander or Inspire, anyone else really besides him, because he wasn't considered, one of the top laners within the region. You still had Wonder above him, or you still had Alfari above him, or Pwipo. So like all these other top laners, you could say, were still above him. But it's kind of a stacked region in that sense anyways. So coming over to North America, I kind of have high hopes for him. Hopefully he can transition maybe into a more carry-oriented role. Hopefully that is the case, because, he was like stomping on Renekton over in LEC, and then he also got to play some games on GP and whatnot. And I didn't get to watch all of the regular season for LEC. I just kind of tuned in every now and again, so maybe I'm missing part of the picture. But I feel like he, at least at the very least, is a gigantic upgrade over Ruin. Like, I still couldn't believe when Ruin was starting for CLG in 2020. I just could not believe it. It's really bad top laner, and there are plenty of top laners that are better than Ruin. So I'm glad they got Finn. Really, they could have gotten anyone, but Finn, I can't knock the pickup, I guess. Now let's move over to Broxa. Broxa, let's just hope he's done with his growing pains of coming to North America, whatnot, adjusting, but also that he's able to control his own destiny in this sense, and that he maybe can take more command over the team and maybe what he wants to do into the early game, instead of being tugged around the map, seemingly of what happened this year or 2020, right? To where it looked like he didn't really have a strong game plan of where he wanted to be at what specific times around the map, and just tell other people like, hey, you got to play safe. I'm going to go here and help this lane, or I'm going to counter jungle or whatever. He never took real full control of his position as a jungler. So I would like to see a little bit more of that when he comes into CLG. I want him to try and find his own voice in that essence, because I think that's one part that is quite necessary for a jungler, especially within the current meta that we saw previously, right? And who knows what is being held within season 11, but you can at least be safe to assume that if all the turret plates exist still and all the dragons and whatnot, and the Rift Herald being important, there's going to be some large significance for the jungle role still as it is, even with just all the items and shit. And I mean, people are saying that jungle is really OP right now, but time will tell, I suppose. So I just like to see Broxa find his own path in that regard. Now, Pobelter, I feel like he was kind of underrated in a sense, which is strange to say for Pobelter, right? Because he's always been either appropriately rated or maybe slightly underrated in some instances, and maybe never got his credit, right? Like one time that I could think is his time in Immortals. I felt like he really wasn't getting that much credit, or maybe people just forgot about that time, right? And that he got some amount of credit, but it wasn't at the grandiose expenditure that most people give to other mid lane players. So I feel like Pobelter at least has shown that he is capable of carrying games, even though it was few and far in between in CLG. But also CLG was a very heavy team. I mean, it was like a fucking Nautilus anchor just going straight down. So it's hard to fault him in that aspect. But I still want to see if Pobelter can maybe keep up that style and keep up the pressure of just how he wants to play the game, and maybe just try and put on the carry pants a little bit more. But with that said, I think with his bot lane of Wild Turtle and Smoothie, that won't necessarily be necessary, because I see Wild Turtle, first of all, he's obviously this ADC that we know can get crazy at times, especially in team fights and maybe when someone needs to pull the trigger and whatnot. So I think he's actually a pretty good addition for this team, given the softer voices on the team themselves, right? So he's this wild card, as it were, which I thought he was going to be the wild card on FlyQuest as well too, but it turns out that the team just worked out really well together anyways. But Wild Turtle is going to be the guy that can kind of make or break this entire lineup, and I think he's the kind of catalyst to start things and maybe start team fights or get a lane advantage if Smoothie is willing to stick in lane. But here's the dynamic part, is that Smoothie can now choose which style he wants to do. He can either go back to his roaming style, or he can try and dominate lane with Wild Turtle. Now, the reason why he has these options is because Wild Turtle is so used to playing without a support, right? Ignar would oftentimes roam after a recall, and then he would have to come back into lane by himself, and maybe Ignar would get a successful gank off or a successful roam off. So Smoothie used to do that back in the day. If you remember back in Cloud9, he was like the roam master. So maybe he can go back and find himself in that playstyle in that sense, and show us exactly what the old Smoothie was all about. And now he's back. So I feel like this is a really good pairing in essence of Wild Turtle and Smoothie. But there is a caveat, and that I think this bot lane will kind of muddle comms in that sense, because as we've heard multiple times, is that Smoothie likes to over iterate or maybe speak too much about unnecessary things in comms, and kind of clog up the communication lines, as it were. And Wild Turtle's one of the more vocal ADCs that you can get. So when you have these two combined in the bot lane, I feel like they're going to be the types of players that are just going to shot call. And maybe you have Pobelter kind of reining all that in and calming everyone down, which I think he can do at some points if you listen into some of the comms that CLG has done in the past or any of the other teams that Pobelter has been on. He's always kind of been that calming voice in essence. So I think all in all, that's probably the biggest weakness of this bot lane. But I think overall, the team is actually decent. It's decent without trying to break the bank. And I really do think that this team can make playoffs for sure. And moving on to the coaching staff, I think having Galen or Moon, I'll just fucking call him Moon for now, having him as the head coach is somewhat of a gamble, I would consider. Because when you think about coaching in terms of heading from academy then to the LCS, the primary thing and the primary difference that you have, well, there are two things. One is that you have way more pressure because your record actually matters in this essence, right? No one really gives a fuck about academy record anyways, other than the person that is actually coaching the team or maybe the players on the team. But everyone else doesn't really care about that, which then leads into the whole pressure aspect of that. You have way more massive amounts of pressure from the community and from even other pro LCS players judging you, and maybe also judging you for next season, to where if they want to pick some of these players up or if they want to pick up the coaching staff or whatnot. So that's one of the biggest factors. The second factor is that you're moving from academy to LCS, while also now you're managing veteran players, right? You're managing a player like Pobelter or Wild Turtle or Smoothie or Broxa. So this is a whole different mindset that you have to get into. It's something way different in terms of coaching, of how to coach a rookie player versus how to coach a veteran player. It's more about managing how these veteran players work together rather than teaching rookie players and how to actually act together, right? And build up those fundamental building blocks to where they can maintain relationships and whatnot. So that's polar different opposites, essentially, of how you need to coach, right? So you need to change a very large part of your coaching philosophy in order to now coach an LCS team. And this is one of the fundamental things that I think a lot of LCS teams still haven't learned. And while I like that they're giving the chance for an academy coach to now be promoted up into the LCS, I think that is kind of cool, just for the big ups and whatnot, and just saying, yeah, good job. But the other side of it is that, well, now you're asking this coach to change his coaching style entirely to accommodate all of these veterans. And I could do a whole fucking separate video on this topic, but essentially it's that you're trying to get this academy coach to slot into this LCS role, which is a way completely different role than what an academy coach is. And not only that, but that you're having them slot into something when they aren't even being an assistant coach in LCS, right? And you're just promoting them to head coach. You're promoting Moon to head coach, which doesn't make sense to me. I mean, that's the same vein as getting Rainover as a head coach, or getting Bjergsen as a head coach. Well, I guess Bjergsen's a little bit different circumstance because, he was not even a fucking academy coach. So that makes completely zero sense in that essence. So I think it's just wild to make this gamble. And CLG previously have had dubious ideas about their coaching staff and their entire infrastructure. So then to do this other move, it seems like they're just either putting too much weight on to Moon to perform now, and they're just somewhat setting him up for failure in that essence. And I would rather have seen them take a slower approach, get a proper head coach, and then have him be an assistant coach in that sense. But I don't know, maybe it'll work out. Not gonna knock the guy. It seems like he was doing okay in the academy scene. So I could see the logic in that he would do well in the LCS too. So overall, I'm not going to knock the entire CLG roster. I think this is actually a lineup that could make it into playoffs. And as a CLG fan, any CLG fans out there, they could be like, oh yeah, well, I mean, that's better than 9th or 10th place. So, why not? This seems like a great opportunity for CLG to get back on their feet for 2021, and then 2022, you drop the books and you put all the fat checks out in order to get everything. You already have the infrastructure set up. You kind of know how to run this shit again. Like, let's get back at it and start to try and be a winning team. So I think all in all, CLG, they're getting back on their feet, and that's what people should think about this roster, is that, yeah, this is a rebuilding in essence of the failures that happened before, and they're trying to wipe the slate clean, and they haven't done any incredible egregious mistakes in just their fundamental roster building in this aspect. So I think it's quite a refreshing take, and I'm excited to kind of see what CLG does. Like I said, I don't expect them to win or get anywhere close to winning LCS, but it'll just be nice to see exactly how kind of far that CLG can get, and if they can actually keep everything held together. I think that's the most important part.